Hey, photography students. We are gonna go over lesson 5 in the textbook. I'm gonna use an example. I am in Photoshop, so hopefully you either have Photoshop or you can download it. I sent the link that you can actually get the Adobe products till the end of May. Adobe has opened it up because of the situation that we are in, and so that you can access all that software. I would highly suggest just downloading Photoshop because it does take up a lot of room on your hard drive and or Lightroom. So all right, so I want to go through chapter 5. So here we go. The book, actually, the chapter starts talking about editing and editing software. So the two big ones are Photoshop and Lightroom. They are fantastic. Remember, Photoshop is what the graphic designers use because it has so many things built right into it that are just, from video to 3D to just a lot of different content for vector and Illustrator oriented text. But Lightroom is more for the photographer, and it really is good at storing your images as well. But we're going to work with Photoshop for now. And so, of course, when you're going to open up something, you would go File, Open, or you could browse in the bridge. Browsing in the bridge right here is another way of getting through. I often would do that in class. It's a nice way to kind of browse around and kind of see what's on your hard drive. And so anyways, or we would go File, Open, and then find the image that you want to open up. And in this case, it's just a road. I will be sending you the 3 files that I'm going to be talking about today, so they will either be in D2L or they'll be in an email so you can work through this on your own. So the book starts talking about image adjustments. So there's really 2 ways to do image adjustments. You can go Image and go Adjustments and go to, for instance, Levels right here. And I can see right off the bat right here, this is a clip. I need to clip this because there's no data there. If you can kind of see, this is called a histogram. It's kind of like an x-ray what's going on in my image area. So I'm going to use this to get it to a nice point. If I have something that's white in this image, I could actually use this little eyedropper and go over and click on that white point. But I don't not in this image, so I'm just going to use that. So that's one way of doing an adjustment. There's another thing that's built into Photoshop called the Adjustments panel. And I can also do the adjustments right here as well. The cool thing about going about it that way is that in your layers palette, it actually creates, let me get this over here, actually creates a whole new adjustment layer. When you do adjustments this way, it doesn't do it to the actual image, it's actually creating an adjustment layer on top. And so that's kind of cool too. And you can do the exact same thing. What's nice is that it's non-destructive. If for some reason you decide, hey, I don't want that anymore, you aren't doing it to the actual pixels, you're doing it to an adjustment layer of the pixels. So it's really a superior way to go about doing your adjustments. There is, and the book talks about that, going in and looking at this content and the histogram. There's another adjustment. It's built right in here. It's called curves. I can go up to that and you'll see that this is a little different. It's also a histogram, and you can control the curve and its behavior. You can make actual adjustments on the curve itself right here in the gamma. You have the black point, the gamma, and then the white point right here. That is what makes up the histogram. Remember, I was talking to you guys at the last time we were in class about that we're really looking at a black and white image when we look at color images, that this is a composite. If we go to channels real quick, and I believe I had time to share this with you guys. It's already open. I can bring it over here for a second. Channels, I actually am looking at a composite of a blue, a green, and a red channel here. It's like these channels of black and white images all put together are what create that final RGB composite. So cool stuff there. All right, so the image adjustments and then making selections. So let's take a look at that. I'm gonna just revert this to the way it was. I'm gonna go File, Revert, so it's exactly the way it was when we first opened it up without the adjustments. So making a selection in Photoshop is pretty easy. There are some tools right here. We can have a rectangular marquee, which you just pull out a rectangle. When you make a selection, it's kind of like putting a fence up. If I go and I apply some type of a filter, for instance, like a ripple effect, and I'm going to overdo it a bit, you can see that it only happens inside of that selection area. I'm going to undo that by going Edit, Undo, Ripple. All right, so that's with the selection. I'm going to get rid of that selection by going Select, Deselect, or Command D. So I can make a circle here, I can make a rectangle. I could use the lasso tool. That's a free form kind of lasso. The polygonal lasso, lasso like straight lines. Magnetic lasso. We're going to be going through a different lesson with these, and I'll talk about all this selection. The quick selection and magic wand. I think I mentioned many times that the quick selection tool is my favorite go-to tool. I enjoy working with it because it's a way of kind of painting a selection. I can kind of go in, and as long as the content sort of matches. Now it goofed up a little bit right in here, you can see. So if I hold down the Option key, I can kind of start to locally get this to back down a little bit. So I made a real quick selection using the quick selection tool. The magic wand tool is wonderful. It likes solid chunks of color. But again, once you make a basic selection, well, you know, I could fill it with the foreground color if I wanted to. I just did that. I'm going to undo that. Edit, Undo. Maybe I want to take that and apply yet another, I don't know, a motion blur. I'm not sure why I'd want to do that, but I'm just trying to play and show you how that while the selection is made, you're able to do that. Okay, in the textbook, chapter 5, page 102, the book starts talking about some of the most common things that people think of Photoshop for, and that's, you know, repairing or touching up images. One of the image here I will be sending to you so you can get into. It's an old photo. You can see just some, you know, it's fading. There's not any real big physical problems with it, but often you'll find that in images. So let me go in and start right off the bat with how would you fix something like these basic problems here. So you have this really wonderful thing called the spot healing tool. It is a tool that you can just go in and start to click, and it does a really good job of filling in. It does all the work. If you want to control where it's sampling from, you would want to use not the spot healing brush, but the healing brush tool. That tool, you actually go in and you have to hold down the Option key and say, okay, get your pixels to blend from here. And that's how you'd start to repair that. And then there is a patch tool, which the patch tool likes big chunks of problems like here. Maybe I want to like surround that. I'm just basically circling it, and then you go into that selection and you click and you drag it to an area that doesn't have a problem. And then content aware and the red eye, we'll look at those in a different lesson. There's another really important tool I want to tell you about. So let's talk about the difference between the spot healing tool and then the clone tool. The spot healing tool, the patch tool, these guys right here, what they do is they blend. They actually go in and they blend pixels from one area with pixels to another to try to make a new composite. With the clone stamp tool, if you've ever worked with this, it just takes pixels from here and moves them there. So let me explain how that would go. Let's say we want to make this guy's head over there. I would hold down Option and I would say, hey computer, get your pixels from here. And then I could move right over here and start to clone that guy's head. I'm not doing any blending. I'm simply taking the pixels from here and I'm moving them there. That is what the clone stamp is really good at. So after you go in and you would take either the healing brush tool here that we looked at a second ago, not quick selection, sorry, the spot healing brush, or you take the clone stamp, you go in and take your time and just do a really good job of repairing and putting all these things back together again. You'd have an option then of possibly doing a cropping. You know, maybe if you're getting paid to do this restoration, you wouldn't want that much information. I could crop this and make things a little straighter with the crop tool, which is right here. shortcut is the letter C. But you can also see that we have like some tonality problems here. I'm actually going to go up to my adjustment panels. Remember we were playing with that in the previous lesson when we were just looking earlier in this chapter. And I am going to go to my levels right off the bat. I'm going to see if I can kind of create a little density in this. There's not a lot of density. The thing with old photos is they start to fade over time. They really do. So that's a little bit better. I like the contrast of that. Maybe I want to go in and noodle around again with the contrast. It might be a little too hard. I'm just trying to work in there. Try to find a good spot where I'm repairing and this is looking better and I'm happier with it. I can go right here to the second row, the third item, and it says make it a black and white layer adjustment. And from right here, I can go in and make this a black and white image, which is fantastic if that's the route. I could also apply a tint to it. Since it has a brown tone tint, which is very popular in the 19th century to have a sepia tone, you know, maybe you want to find a nice tonality that you would want to apply, and you can change that, which is really great. Let's say I like that, but I can change that tint right here. If I go into that third little adjustment layer, I can go into tint, click on that, and then maybe I want it, you know, I want it blue. How about that? I'll just really live on the edge here and have a blue tone to my image. Of course, I don't want that, but you kind of get the idea. You can adjust it back to black and white, and then I'll you know, put a tint on it if that's what you. So the next page in the chapter talks about sharpening, and I'm going to take a few minutes and talk about sharpening. When you have completed all your restoration work and you're happy with what you did here, and you know, if you want to go on and give this a tint, you go on and do that, and all things look good. The last thing you want to do is sharpen an image, and I'm going to talk about sharpening for a moment. So images, when we talk about sharpening, sometimes when you scan it, sometimes when you print it. In this situation, I can see this was a long exposure because this guy right here, his face moved. Where this guy's clear, that guy must have moved at some point. So maybe we want to try to sharpen this up a bit. And so to do that, you go to Filter, and we have a couple different options here. Whenever you see that ... that means that the computer, Photoshop's just going to do it to you. But you guys know that you like to be in control of this, so there's two sharpening features that I recommend. One is called Smart Sharpen. Oops, you know what? We're on the adjustment layer, so let me go and flatten this real quick. Give me a second. Yikes. All right, I go to Layers, and I am going to just flatten this down so that I have it all. So now I can go in and sharpen. So if I go Filter, go back in, and it's nothing like watching it a second time. It's always good. And I go to Smart Sharpen here. I can go in and tell it what kind of, whether this was a lens blur or a motion blur. Well, I know that guy's moving, so this was for sure not the photographer. This was the people in the shot. So I could do motion blur, and I could actually go in and increase the sharpening of that and let it work that way if I would like that. I'm going to undo that and go show you the other sharpening technique. So if we go back to Sharpen, we go to Smart Sharpen, right underneath that is a generic kind of sharpening called Unsharp Mask. If I go to that, I could control the amount of sharpening, and we have 75 is where it's set right now. And that's pretty decent for most. Sometimes I rarely go above that, but 75 is good. So I'm going to click OK, and there we go.